Friendships are arguably one of the most important relationships that we develop from a very early age. There's a transitionary period where we go from caring more about our parents and our family unit to really centering and prioritizing our peer relationships. There are many TV programs, TV shows, commercials that highly center and emphasize the need to have strong bonds that last forever, right? You're a friend from middle school, elementary school, preschool, who becomes your best friend throughout your formative years, and then is a bridesmaid at your wedding, marries your boyfriend's best friend, and then you guys have babies at the same time. However, there is the reality of that situation and the fantasy that many of us believe and hold on to. So today we're talking about friendship tension and breakups that happen naturally in relationships and how to navigate those spaces when you're a more sensitive person. So the first thing I want to do is define what I mean when I say a more sensitive person, a highly sensitive person. So all of us have the ability to sense the world with our senses, unless something is wrong with you. But we're talking about people who have that ability: sight, smell, taste, touch, sounds. And there are those of us where our senses get more overwhelmed by certain sounds or certain smells. We process the world with more of our senses than just our eyes and our ears. So if you're navigating a relationship with a friend, any kind of relationship in which you have attached yourself to this person, you're going to use more of your senses to decode tension or communication with this individual. Now, sometimes this can be mislabeled as being more highly sensitive, too sensitive, but sometimes, and I'm specifically talking about having relationships with people who intentionally mislabel your sensitivity when those people tend to lack empathy. It's no different than when you are more sensitive and you're just very self-aware and you have the ability to process things from multiple layers. So you can see why someone upset you, why you shouldn't really be as emotionally responsive, but also still hold compassion for that person. That ability to have high level of self-awareness is often mislabeled as overthinking, especially by the wrong people in the wrong crowds. So if you're someone who identifies as being highly sensitive or navigates the world and your spaces using more of your senses and you get overwhelmed by certain things, it can feel literally overwhelming. Recognize that words have meaning. So however you're identifying yourself, whether it is a label that you gave to yourself or one that you have acquired through connection with other people, you want to be aware of what you're saying about yourself or what you're believing about yourself. So if you identify as highly sensitive, but you see it as a negative, we want to rewrite that relationship so that we reframe it in a way that allows us to have more positivity towards it versus seeing it as a handicap. And for those of us who are struggling with the idea of being more sensitive or using more of your senses, there have been studies where people who listen to music, some people have a visceral reaction to the music. They have an actual physical bodily reaction to listening to music. And other people, it's sort of like, nah, it doesn't really hit them. So this is what I mean when I'm describing being more sensitive, being more in tune with your reality with more than just your eyes or just your ears. When you are really almost energetically feeling things, right? When we're picking up on the energy or the vibes of somebody, or we're connecting to someone on a deeper level, you can navigate those spaces with more intensity than other people. Now, again, this is why we want to identify this as not being a negative thing, because being highly sensitive or more sensitive is not necessarily a bad thing. If you're overwhelmed by it and it's not helping you, then you might just need to activate or think about more ways and techniques to help you navigate and regulate your nervous system while you're in these situations that cause more tension in your body. So when we're thinking about friendships, societal versions and definitions versus reality. So again, when we talk about programming, what we see on TV, and the fact that this is for entertainment purposes and the idea that this is not necessarily a true reflection of what happens in real life, we want to think about what things we have identified as being healthy, normal friendship relationships. So in TV shows, there's always like the popular group, the loner group, the people who are more catty, more aggressive, and then there's the groups that are sort of just existing. And we see things like people from different groups merging together. We see friendships that last for many, many years, or simple things break these groups up. And in reality, there is an ebb and flow that happens in friendships, especially when you're thinking about yourself as a human being and how you evolve naturally throughout life. Who you were in elementary school is not even who you're going to be by the time you finish elementary school and hit middle school. And middle school is a massive space where we hit puberty and a lot of bodily changes happen. A lot of things happen in our minds, emotionally, chemically, and so does our relationship with our peers and ourselves. There are some people who literally arrest their development emotionally in middle school and high school. Sometimes we can still want those friendships to continue on even into our early adult years because we're comfortable, even if you're moving in different directions than those people are. And so again, if you're believing in the idea that these relationships are supposed to last forever, that can cause tension in your body. And if you're a more sensitive person, you navigate life more deeply emotionally connected to your surroundings and yourself and the people that you find yourself attached to, that's going to cause a lot of friction in your body, in your emotional body, in your mental body, in your nervous system. And again, we know that stress can cause significant bodily harm and changes because our body is literally trying to prioritize our survival. And again, this happens with just our thoughts. Now, the reality is that these friendships, over time, they can just become less. They can become dwindled. And it's not necessarily that something went wrong or that you did something wrong. You just grew apart. And sometimes the tension that you're feeling in the relationship is not necessarily present in the relationship. It could just be in your mind. And I don't mean that in the sense of dismissing you and you shouldn't think about it. I mean, are you feeling tension because you want the relationship to continue, or are you feeling tension because you guys are no longer getting along? And if we're not getting along because we're in different stages of life, there are different ways that we can navigate those situations. So the comment that I got that sparked the idea for this video was to just talk about friendship tension from the perspective of being a highly sensitive person. And I don't necessarily know if the tension that you're feeling in your relationship is because it's a healthy one that is taking a turn, or it is a toxic relationship that is taking a turn. So we're going to talk about both situations. And then whatever applies to you, that's what you use to help you move forward. So when you think about healthy relationships, healthy connections that we have with friends, in order to resolve tension in those relationships, there are a few steps that we can take in order to navigate those in a way that still respects our boundaries, but also those of the other person. So the first thing is going to be communication. If this is a relationship in which both of you respect each other, the ability to communicate with each other when you're both, again, this is healthy, where you identify and respect each other's boundaries, the ability to communicate is open and free. That looks like saying, hey, can I talk to you about something? This was something that bothered me. What are your thoughts? I don't think you tried to offend me, but this is how I felt. Sometimes we can be offended by something that has nothing to do with that actual person. They triggered a thought. They triggered a memory. They triggered something within us that made us feel like we need to react. Again, stress activation through our thoughts. And when you're dealing with someone who is also healthy and healed and grounded, their ability to hold space for you is infinite. Even if they weren't necessarily seeing it from the perspective that you were, people who are healthy have the ability and the capacity to hold space for you as you navigate those feelings, even if they're ones that would make them feel uncomfortable too. The next thing is to have healthy detachment. Again, we want to see it from a different perspective, not even theirs or our own, but from a third party perspective, a higher vantage point, because again, you could be offended by something or you could feel that there's tension and that other person didn't necessarily see it that way or didn't do it to upset you. And when we have a healthy level of detachment, we can literally see it from multiple perspectives and allow ourselves to shift without causing more damage in a relationship that we actually value than we need to. The other thing is boundaries. When you have a healthy relationship and there is tension, you do want to have boundaries. Healthy relationships, especially friendships, do have boundaries. You don't have to spend every waking minute with this person. They are not your partner. I had a friend who really tried to create partners, mothers, boyfriends, family support units with her friends, but she never gave that to other people. So she wanted me to pay for certain things. She wanted her friends to babysit her kids. She wanted to use us as if we were an extension of herself. That's not what I'm talking about when I say healthy relationships. I have friends that I see on a consistent but spaced out basis, and we respect each other's lives. We love catching up and we love talking to each other, but if we also know that we have busy lives. So if she has something going on and we have a meeting schedule where we want to have a Zoom chat, but she has something happening, I don't make her feel guilty for that. And likewise, she doesn't make me feel guilty for that. That is having healthy boundaries with the people that we can say we love, but there are people that we respect their lives and they respect ours. The other thing that you want to have in order to resolve tension in your healthy friendships is mutual respect. Again, when emotions are high and we're feeling uncomfortable and we feel like we might have been slighted, we want to remember to check our emotions at the door, to use kind words. Words have meaning. And when we communicate with someone, we want to make sure that what we say is actually what we mean on an energetic, spiritual, psychological, aligned level. Not just saying the first thing that comes to mind because we want to hurt this person's feelings or we want them to feel what we believe we felt. The next kind of relationship that I want to talk about if you have tension in this relationship and you're a highly sensitive person is toxic relationships. Again, I always say everything is not gender specific. So you can have the same kind of tension and disrespect that you have in a romantic partnership, you can find in friendships. And when you are navigating spaces of tension with toxic people, there are a different set of parameters that you need to be aware of in order to navigate those spaces, especially if you're a highly sensitive person. So the first thing I want to talk about is distance. Sometimes when you are thinking to yourself that your relationship with this individual, you're not quite sure what's going on, but you don't like the way it feels in your body, especially again, if you're more on the emotional side and you have more of a connection to your feelings and it feels very strong. We want to create distance between ourselves and the people who are creating tension in our lives, because we need to be aware of ourselves versus them. We want to make sure we're not being gaslighted into more tense situations or feelings, and this is actually how we're feeling. Going no contact with friends is a very real thing, especially if these are toxic, narcissistic people. And again, for some of us, if that's uncomfortable for you, you can start small. You don't have to say, I'm never going to talk to them again. If that, again, doesn't make you feel good, you can say things like, I'm just not going to answer their phone call. I'm not going to answer their text messages immediately. I had a friend who, again, wanted to go out, but I was paying for everything. She would try and constantly say little nasty things to me to make me feel uncomfortable. This is creating tension in our friendship. However, again, you need to realign your definition of friendship with where it actually falls. Is it healthy or is this a toxic relationship? If it is a toxic interaction, I don't care who it's with, that is not a friendship. The same way that when we talk about relationships, romantic partnerships, if it's not healthy, that's not love. The next tip is to be more self-aware. When we're self-aware, we can recognize what is us and what is our thoughts versus what is the situation versus what is caused by that other person. I remember seeing this woman who talked about different kinds of friendships and how and again, I don't know her situation. I'm just giving it from the perspective of when we're talking about toxic people. So she was talking about how she had friends that just ghosted her, who just disappeared, didn't say anything, and she felt like that was immature and that's not how you deal with friendship issues, that you should talk to the other person. She also felt like she keeps people around, even if they're just acquaintances or like the sometimes friends. So again, this is why we want to get clear, because words have meaning, and you want to realize that sometimes your definition of a friendship isn't even aligned with someone else's definition of a friendship. If someone thinks that you're just a sometimes friend, or you're an acquaintance, or you're someone that they hang out with when they're feeling down, that may not even align with your idea of friendships or who you give yourself and time to energetically. And I have personally found that toxic, narcissistic people, there is no sit down and have a chat with these people. You do need to stop talking to them. Because especially if you're a highly sensitive person, the first thing that they're going to do is try to trigger you, try to emotionally get you off centered, off balance. And if you desperately feel like you need to communicate with someone like this, there are times where you need to be so scripted in your communication with this person in order to confidently navigate that conversation without getting derailed by your emotions. And again, I'm telling you, as somebody who has had this with multiple people in my life, even when I was highly scripted and I knew what they were going to say and what I would say in response, it didn't matter, because a lot of times people like this aren't going to do the same thing every single time. Like, they might do a variation of it, but they're constantly evolving in their tactics against you. So for example, again, this friend who was always getting me to pay for stuff, and I eventually just had to say to her, I'm not doing it. Like, I don't have the money. Or I would say things like, you know, if she would say, well, I don't have enough money to do this, I would say, you don't have to do that. We could just do this thing. Even if like we were going out to have drinks and lunch, and then she comes out with $20, and I meant to somehow come up with the rest of it for her. And so she said, well, I can afford food, but I can't afford drinks. So I was like, then don't get drinks. There are times where you're going to have to establish that you have boundaries with your words and your energy. Being scripted enough to say, okay, the tension that we have is related to her constantly using me for rides. Okay, so then you're going to have to get comfortable with saying, I'm not available for that. If the tension is related to the fact that, you know, they say they're going to show up and they say they're going to do this, but then they don't. Again, same thing that I had was a friend who would say, let's go out and let's hang out. And then she would just not show up. And then she tried to make it seem like she just didn't like going out. She didn't want to do that. And she started to shame me for the fact that I wanted to. And then I found out she was hanging out with other people. But these were the same people that she said she didn't feel uncomfortable around. She felt like her body wasn't as big around theirs because they were bigger than her. So again, right, how do I relieve that kind of tension? She wanted advice on how to lose weight. She wanted advice on certain things. And then eventually she's telling me, I just need to stop being skinny. There are certain people that no matter what you say, there isn't enough scripting in the world unless you're trying to be their personal punching bag. So you have to decide what kind of tension is actually in your relationship, and is the relationship worth salvaging? As always, a lot of these things that we see as normal have a starting point. So your friendships, although it seems completely separate from your family and your family dynamics, there is going to be a starting point back there. So if you have, let's say it's not a healthy relationship and that you have tension in, it's a more unhealthy relationship, it's a more toxic connection, and you just can't seem to let that friendship go. Sometimes you can find that this person actually reminds you a lot of a parent or a sibling or a cousin or someone very connected to your family, and their dominance, your nervous system, your subconscious mind overreacts to or reacts to and aligns with because it's familiar. You could also find that the tension you have in your relationship is because you were not used to being given the room to speak up for yourself. So you feel very uncomfortable with saying, hey, I have a problem with the way that you spoke to me. I have a problem with the fact that when we hang out, you do X, Y, and Z. Your nervous system remembers, your body remembers, your subconscious remembers. It has a file on how we react to certain situations. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, it could be that that's what you typically did in those situations. The other thing is that, again, if we're highly sensitive, sometimes we're not necessarily, I'm not going to say we're not highly sensitive. I'm going to say that sometimes our nervous system is just dysregulated. So you can feel like you're very, very sensitive, and in reality, you've just never felt safe in your body. You've never felt safe in your body, in your home, while you were growing up, in your relationships, in your friendships. So you actually don't know what it feels like to just be calm in your body. And you can find that a lot of these issues where you feel like you're more sensitive would be alleviated if you had the ability to calm yourself down, recenter yourself, if you had a system in place that helped you navigate those bigger emotions in a more effective way. If you had a system in place that helped you feel more comfortable as you interacted with people. The tension could be that you like connecting with people and your relationships are going well, but the moment something starts to seem a little bit off, you feel really uncomfortable about that phase. This is when we have to say that these normal cycles are very typical in relationships. Now, again, it depends on whether or not it's a healthy connection or a toxic one, but even healthy connections, you could just find that your friend had a baby, you had a baby, your friend got married, your friend got into a relationship, your friend moved across the state, they got a different job, they went to college, you didn't, like you went to college, they didn't. And the normal gap in your relationship just extended to a point where you didn't really align, but there was no negativity, it just fizzled. That's normal, that's okay. When we have toxic relationships, the same thing. It is normal for you to get to a point where you're like, actually, my frontal lobe has developed and I no longer want to be in a relationship like this. I no longer want friends like this. I'm out of my 20s and I don't see the value of keeping people like this in my 30s. I'm in my late 20s and I want to consciously have more intentional connections with people, and that includes friendships. That's normal too. Again, being highly sensitive is not a curse, it is a gift. And like any gift, how we use it, how we navigate life with it is going to determine what we feel as we show up as our authentic self. And again, being more authentically you could mean that you're not necessarily aligned with the same people that you were aligned with before. This is not fake. This is normal. This is evolution of self. This is becoming more self-aware. This is becoming more grounded and more aligned. And as we travel through life, the things that we once felt were important to us, we no longer align with. And sometimes that is with people too.